tonight. I want to first thank our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Cook County, of Evanston, Glencoe, Glenview, Wilmette and Winnetka, Northfield and Kenilworth, and our governmental sponsors who are all doing their work in various capitals. They're not with us tonight, but Jan Schakowsky in Congress, Daniel Biss and Ira Silverstein in the Senate, and Heather Staines in the Senate, and then Representatives Gable, Fine, D'Amico, Cassidy, and Lang, who are in the Illinois House. The idea for this evening came from the fact that I've been doing, especially in this room and a number of other rooms, meetings with the assessor and with the Board of Review as we explain what their function is and how we help people appeal their property taxes. And I realize that we're self-government, Cook County. We might be the 19th largest government in the United States, which we are. We'd be the 14th largest state in the Union if we were just a state. But most people don't really understand all the functions we have, and many of our functions are in fact state functions in most other places. So I thought what we should start is having these kind of town hall meetings with the countywide elected officials who have different responsibilities. Next month we're going to do one with new State's Attorney Kim Fox, and we're working at a site I think in Evanston for that one. And then we'll do one with Sheriff Dark after that. And the idea is to eventually have a number of these meetings and you have a chance to interact and talk about the functions that these people have as governmental people. We're not here as political people, we're here as your government. Now, the subject matter tonight on elections becomes timely because of congressional investigations on foreign governments' potential interference, the fact that there's a belief that a foreign government may have hacked into the Illinois State Board of Elections website. It's also when you have a number of people who are concerned that there is fraud in registration, that there was fraud in turnout, and that there was fraud in the count, that it becomes important for us to point out to you the integrity of the system that we have. The election process is the front door of democracy. And I think that what you need to understand is that if you don't have a good election system, you don't have a democracy. You have a rigged government. And hopefully today, we'll be able to give you confidence that what we're doing in Cook County, which by the way is the third largest election system in the United States. I mean, we are not some little village. We are one of the largest election authorities in this country. Over 2 million people in suburban Cook. And David works closely with the Chicago Board of Elections, which is primarily funded by the Cook County Board and by all of your taxes. We fund a significant amount, well over in a federal election and a statewide election year, about $40 million in his funding goes to both the Chicago Board of Elections and the Cook County Clerk's Office. And in these off years where we're just doing municipal elections, I think David, about 22 million is what David's office will be having. Chicago only has one election, so because of the way that municipal elections work on the Chicago side, they're not every year facing elections the way the clerk's office is. Now, I kind of come at this as a lawyer who practiced election law for a long time. In 1983, I had a client who ran for mayor of Chicago. His name was Richard M. Daley, and he was also the state's attorney of Cook County. In a forum, after I put together an anti-fraud program in that campaign, because we were very concerned that people like Ed Verdoliak and Jane Byrne were going to be doing some things in that election, Rich introduced me to a crowd as saying, Larry knows more about vote fraud than anybody I've ever met. I'm the state's attorney, let's say I know how to stop it. Yeah. But what I learned in those days is that all of the election process starts with registration. And we're going to tonight talk about the need to make registration easy. we should not be putting obstacles in the way of people to be able first to get into the system to vote. The second thing is we need to make sure that we don't have obstacles thrown in front of us when you go to vote. Now, the first campaign that I really was involved in as a lawyer was in Waukegan. And in those days, they had buses. Everybody involved in this, by the way, did get indicted and go to jail. But we found that they had buses and they were moving people from precinct to precinct, and people had little cards saying what their name was to be able to vote for the incumbent mayor of Waukegan in that election. And so registration had been really preempted by fraud in the system. But then when they got to vote, if it was a regular voter, in those days we used paper ballots, and if paper ballots had a mark on them that was not just the X, it was considered to be a spoiled ballot, and so they used to put lead under their fingernails, the judges, and as they counted ballots on those that were for the other opponent, they would put a mark, and then they'd say, oh, we have to throw this one out because it's a mark. And again, I saw that, and we try to stop it and say, look, he's got lead. They say, who are you? So I'm conscious of the need for the system to work once you're there. I was fortunate enough today to vote in Evanston. That's why I'm wearing my thing. We're having a primary in Evanston. Most of the other communities around us are not having primaries right now. They're just going to have the April election. But, I went in and voted, and I have absolute confidence that the vote I cast today will be counted on on February 28th, when the election primary is. And then you have the issues of count. When I started practicing law, you had long nights because you had to try to figure out how to get these counts in, and you had to try to get them downtown. David and the system he'll describe today gives us almost instantaneous counts. It's remarkable, and it's going to get better. Now, I talked about the amount of money we spend on elections, but we can't do it alone. We can't, as taxpayers of a county, pay for this. In 2000, when we had the presidential election that was so close that went to the United States Supreme Court, the Congress reacted and passed a bill, HAVA, Help America Vote Act, and it had in it significant funds to governments like ours to be able to purchase equipment. Unfortunately, that money has now dried up. The equipment that we bought back then is now 16 years old. Think about where computers were 16 years ago. We need to be figuring out how to afford new equipment. And I know I've met some people here who are very concerned about where does that new equipment come from. David held last week what was referred to as the auto show of voting machines at the Union League Club, where, unfortunately I wasn't there, but I was described to me by some of my staff that were, where you went and these machines were set up and there were salesmen, just like they would in a car dealership, to tell you about all the features, the bells and whistles that each of these machines had and why they should be considered when and if we get millions and millions of dollars to be able to buy these things and replace what we have. Now, one of the things that gives us great stability in the election process in Cook County is the fact that David Orr has been the clerk of Cook County since 1990. Now, if he was starting his political career back then, he would be an old political guy. But he pointed out to me that he first got elected when Jimmy Carter was president in the 1979 election for the Chicago City Council and became the 49th Ward Alderman. I was aware of David back then because he taught at Mundelein College where my wife went to school, and many of the faculty, students, and especially the nuns were all behind David in helping to turn out people in that 79 election. He had the distinction of being the 43rd mayor of the city of Chicago. You may remember, he has a picture on his website of Alderman Dick Mell standing on a table when they were trying to pick Harold Washington's successor after his death. And in the interim, David was the mayor of Chicago for a number of days and tried to keep the city together during that hectic period. And then Gene Sawyer replaced David. But if you go into the mayor's office, on the wall of honor of the mayors of the city of Chicago, David is down there, and the 43rd mayor of the city of Chicago. He has, as the clerk, many responsibilities more than just elections. We're going to focus on elections today, but I want you to just realize that this is the office where you have death certificates, birth certificates. He's done a lot of things on genealogy. You get your marriage certificates there. You prove that you have been married for insurance purposes or other things that you may need. He has been someone who, in taxes, has been the expert on TIFs so that we understand how much money is being diverted from the normal budget process. A friend of mine says TIFs are what you call government off the books because it's pools of money that people can spend without going through the normal process. David has put sunlight on that. He was a leader in passing human rights reforms, ethics reforms. He and I have had the opportunity to work on a number of things to make it easier for you to find out economic disclosure statements of your elected officials, who's lobbying us, what they're doing. We've put in a lot of restrictions over the last few years together, but David was involved in this long before I thought about running for government in 2002. He has put out reports that give you more data than any other election authority in the nation. And one of the things that I'm very proud to say is that this post-election report, which I hope you'll talk about today, gives you quick facts that are really important. And one of them is, last November, our jurisdiction had a 72% turnout. That's a historic high. Now, it's not as high as other countries where you can get into the 90s. And again, if elections are the front door of democracy, we need to be pushing more and more for people to show up and vote. But it's my pleasure right now to introduce my partner in government, the clerk of Cook County, David Orr, and then after his presentation, we will take questions as long as you need. We're going to ask that the questions be more general. If you have a specific question about your voting, we'll handle those offline so that we don't waste everybody else's time. And hopefully we'll be out of here by 8 o'clock. David.
Good evening. Are we going to be able to see this PowerPoint? If you can't find it, if we can't find it, if not, it will make a big difference. But I want you to look at the guy on there. Larry, thank you for the introduction and for having this town hall meeting. But I'm very sincere when I say you are all very lucky. Larry is an outstanding elected official. Yes, he's a county commissioner, but he's smart. He's very smart. He works very hard. There's almost nothing about government that he doesn't know. And perhaps most important, he's willing to stick up for what he believes in. He ticks off some pretty powerful people sometimes. But if he does it with poise and does it for a good reason. So you're very lucky, and I'm really, I mean that, Larry, and thank you. So. I have to tell you one story, only one political story tonight. True story, and I can tell it now because that individual is dead. That is the famous Alderman Fred Rhodey. No offense to the large Rhodey family, but Fred was the first ward in Chicago alderman. And the first ward, of course, had a great reputation of being mobbed up. And actually, Fred, after many years in city council, went to jail for mob activities.
Actually, David, I'm looking at this photo. One of the aldermen behind him also went to jail.
Well, no offense, but a lot of my colleagues went to jail. Several others should have gone to jail. Anyway, so Fred was the first ward alderman. Here's a story back during when I was in the city council in the 80s. So that morning, I did not know Fred well, but I was talking to him before the council meeting, and he pointed out something. Said, you know, his wife's maiden name is the same as mine. So his wife's maiden name was Orr. I thought nothing about it, but during the council meeting, what happened is when independents like me would speak, that Mel and Rhodey and Burke, you know, they'd all stand in the corner and make a lot of noise, hoping to detract the press, because, you know, powerful mayors like Daley and others did not like to hear from people like me. So they make a lot of noise, but when you're in politics, you get used to it, don't think anything of it. So that particular morning, I was speaking on something, they were making a lot of noise, and I kind of looked over and I said, well, you can see, just because Fred's wife is married to an whore hasn't done me any good. Didn't think much about it, sat down, boom, immediately. 15, 20 press, they kind of run from where they sit over there and shove a bunch of microphones in my face and basically said, did you just call Fred's wife a whore? We can laugh about it now, but I'll tell you, the mob is not dead in Chicago, I hate to say that. And all day long I kept getting those notices. Hey, Dave, the cement truck's out front for you. Okay, that's the only story. Now, as Larry mentioned, there's a lot of things I'd love to talk about, but I'm going to pass through a lot of things that our office does, which is pretty exciting. You mentioned the genealogy. It's a whole new concept. It saves us a ton of money, and having genealogy online, now that people can get records that they never would be able to find before. So there's a lot of things you can do if you really want to make government work. And that's really the goal of our office, to make things efficient. And maybe some other time we'll talk about government efficiencies. And Larry was hinting when he talked about the two election boards that perhaps they should be combined. And of course, I believe they should be. And as you may know, voters voted to combine the recorder's office into the county clerk's office. That's the good news. It'll save us a lot of money. But it doesn't take place until 2020. But so there are things that government could do if we have time to talk about it. But on the local elections, the main thing I want to say very quickly, we've got information in the back, particularly about the April 4th election, early voting and so forth, is that we know it, and you're here, you probably know it, but we'll have 72-3% turnout presidential, but we might have 19% turnout in a local election. And yet, that's where the money is spent. I can't even read that, but maybe somebody can. But we're talking about $5 billion just spent by all the school boards in Cook County. $5 billion. Okay, so these offices are important, and there's lots of them. There'll be thousands of candidates on the ballot April 4th. Village trustee, village mayor, village president, alderman, park board, library board, school board, lots and lots of candidates. Something new I want to mention briefly is that we came up with an idea. I have some great staff, some of them are here tonight, this idea of running for office toolkit. What that basically is, we want to encourage candidates. These offices don't pay much money, maybe new to people. We want healthy competition. The Running for Office Toolkit gives you everything you need to know online, all in one spot, about what it means to run for office. Okay, now that's important because it can be confusing. We don't control everything. There's other shenanigans that go on sometimes with electoral boards. But the bottom line is this kit is working. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been using it. So, but tonight, as Larry said, I want to focus on democracy, voting rights, and where we're at. And I'm not saying that just because we have a good president. I've been very concerned about democracy for a long time. And I will tell you, I believe we have extremely serious threats to our democracy. I do not believe it is working well. The bottom line in democracy, take all the theory and boil it down, is that what is supposed to happen, elections and people voting, is supposed to shape the public policy. Otherwise, the voting is no good. Now, we see that in other countries all the time. They vote for something, nothing changes. They vote for something, it's like you ignored it. They call themselves an election, but it doesn't mean anything. Now, we're not there, but I do worry about it. So what I want to do is talk about some of these obstacles that are put out there and what we can do about it. Because anytime there's obstacles to registration, to voting, to participation, to being heard, that lessens the chance that voters will shape public policy. Let me give you an example. Let me talk about Old Man Daley, okay? The great Old Man Daley. Well, in the old Democratic machine, you have to understand, and I'm a Democrat, and maybe seen as partisan. The things I'm talking about tonight, I'll be glad, but I think the Democrats are wrong, Republicans are wrong. But as someone who fought the Democratic machine all my life, if you want to look at voter suppression, look at the old Democratic machine, okay? And if you believe that some of those people elected who could never be elected. There's lots of different kinds of voter suppression, and I'm no more happy about what they did then than what I'm happy about people are trying to do today. And of course, the powerful want to control government and shape public policy. It's in their interest. The key is in a well-run democracy is we don't let them do it, or we make it harder for them to do it. Okay, so the two major threats I'm going to talk on briefly. Some of these are pretty cute, but I don't think you can all see them. The two major problems are money in politics and voter suppression. I'm going to skip through those fairly quickly, but money in politics, I think we all have a pretty good sense of that. That even before the Citizens United decision, money was having way too big a role to play. But in 2010, with the Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United, it moved us more rapidly from one person, one vote, to the new reality that money grossly amplifies your speech and influence. Grossly amplifies your speech. Way back in 1979, I was a young professor. I think I was making $14,000 at then was Wonderland College. But I was able to run, and with the gentleman in the back south back there, Mike Krylov, able to win. And I wasn't a very wealthy guy. Today, largely because the inaction of our Congress and others on campaign finance and court rulings, again, they've changed the entire fundraising game. And it's opened the floodgates for money. So money rather than people shape public policies, and has many other negatives. But again, if we have time, we'll talk about it. Just one quick example. So if you look at fundraising in Illinois from both parties in 2014, 51% of all the money raised by millionaires, 51% of all the money raised by both parties. Now look at the Republican Party alone, and look at their $100-some million that were raised. Over 50% came from 3 billionaires. 50% of all that money came from 3 billionaires, a gentleman named Rauner, a gentleman named Griffin, and a gentleman named Uline. Okay? It says a lot, nothing against these individuals. We'd all like to be wealthy, but it's just the way our country should be run. And let me go a little further. Now, you may not agree with this, but if you don't think money affects who gets elected and how they govern, let me suggest this. I do not believe that either our current governor, a Republican, or our current mayor, a Democrat, will be in office today if we had even minimal decent campaign finance rules. Nothing against individuals, but my take of politics, without the kind of money that was spent, they would not have been elected. Another danger we're facing now is increasingly these powerful individuals, take these two for example and others, are amassing millions of dollars on the side to pretty much force, intimidate, threaten the elected officials under them to go along. Okay, it takes a lot of courage for legislatures to know the governor's got $50 million sitting there, you're going to cross him. The mayor's got $20 million sitting there, you're going to cross him. Now, some people do, fortunately. Some people have guts. But those are trends we need to find a way to stop. Also, our challenges today are tougher because of dark money. Okay? And remember, part of it is not just unlimited money because of courts, but dark money. Most everybody would agree, Republican, Democrat, left, right, that we should have transparency. Except now, dark money means you don't know where the money's coming from. And that can be a very scary thing if you know politics. The easiest monies to raise are from those that have bad reputations. So dark money is a big challenge. And just one fact down there, in Koch brothers, they get beat up a lot, but they raised $407 million through 17 various groups, but we don't know the source of the money. 407 million, that's a lot of bread. But it's not all doom and gloom. Okay? There's a lot of good people, good organizations, good elected officials that are doing things. Let's talk about some of the good things that are going on to challenge the money. Number one, Seattle. Seattle, back in 2015, passed a citizens initiative called Democratic Vouchers. Some of you may know about it. What it basically said is we believe we have to have more competition and we can't let money rule everything. So we, the city of Seattle, are going to say each of our citizens that qualify, being a duly registered voter, we're going to give you 4 vouchers of $25 each. And those vouchers you can use for the candidate of your choice if the candidates participate in this voluntary program. You may want to give 25 bucks to 4 people. You might give all 4, 25, 4 times 25 to one candidate. Okay. Now the first time it's really going to affect is this year. So it's going to be kind of a fascinating example to watch, because everything people are trying to do is trying to get around those very tricky Supreme Court decisions. Okay, that basically said the more money you have, that's the more speech you have. Okay. So Seattle's pretty exciting. California has been doing a lot to attack dark money. For example, they have all these ballot measures. Remember California? It's such a big state. They're often tens of millions of dollars in a ballot initiative. We don't really have those here in Illinois. We have some, but they're very different. So one of the things they did is they said the top 10 contributors have to be identified. Okay. More recently, because you never know who's giving all this money. Okay. There could be the biggest polluter in the state giving money, you wouldn't know it, and they're supposedly for a clean river measure. So they're trying to identify those things, and so the latest thing they're saying, for those generic names, if you're the Good Government California Committee or whatever, then you have to also disclose the top 2 contributors that are paying for that ad. We're talking usually about some very large amounts of money. So we have a lot of things California's doing. Small donor matching. Small donor matching. Is David Melton here tonight? Maybe it'll be, but there's a lot of good shout-outs tonight for people doing things. Small donor matching is taking place in New York and several eastern states, and the idea is that we will match small amounts of money and encourage you to raise your money in smaller donation, and we'll match it. And now our own Senator Daniel Biss has introduced legislation, Senate Bill 1424, to do just that in Illinois. And similar things are being discussed right now in Cook County, City of Chicago, Oak Park, and I believe Evanston. Okay? Now, this is a voluntary program. Basically do the following. If you participate in this, again, you could get contributions of 25 to 150, but those will be matched at a 6-to-1 rate. So if you get 25 bucks from your neighbor, my math is right, then you'll get 150 to match that. So it means now that you've got a chance to perhaps compete. You might be a wonderful person, extraordinarily talented, articulate, committed, but you don't have any money. So you might be a great candidate. So there'd be other regulations, of course, limits on the amount of public funds available for each candidate, and you couldn't take large sums of money, which is the whole idea behind it. The Illinois Coalition for Political ICPR Reform. Another great group. Pay attention to them. They estimate the cost is to be $1 per resident. Okay, so that's going to, of course, be discussed. It's pretty fascinating. Okay, let me jump now to the second big threat of voter suppression. And I'm not going to dwell a lot on that because you know it, but I'll be glad to answer questions if you want. But kind of historically, when an individual, a candidate, or a party can't get elected fairly, a lot of times they'll stoop to cheating or voter suppression. Obviously, the whole history of the South in trying to, not just the South, but mostly the South, trying to make sure that African Americans couldn't vote, or if they could vote, it wouldn't have any effect. Okay, a long history of that. And again, this is both parties. That was mostly the Democrats in the South, by the way. And all my political career, most of the voter suppression today is being done in Republican states. But I'd have to say, unfortunately, there's many Democrats who do the same thing if they thought it would benefit them. I look at the city of Cicero. I like to pick on Cicero, but there, the Democrats and Republicans work together, and there's always measures trying to suppress the vote. It wasn't that long ago. It was back in the mid-'90s. I had to go out there because the police were arresting Latinos because they didn't have a permit to register voters. Well, there is no permit needed to register voters, but at that time, Latinos were a threat to that existing population, so the police were ordered by the mayors of Cicero, who have some great reputations over here, just arrest them. Okay? So there's a lot of things that have happened over the years. Some of the worst voter ID stuff has to do with voter ID. Also redistricting. Okay? Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you might ask, is it fair that state of Virginia has a Democratic governor, has 2 Democratic senators, meaning the people by and large vote for Democrats, and yet Republicans control the entire local house and therefore blah, blah, blah. Same thing in North Carolina, Pennsylvania. People might argue the reverse of that in Illinois, although I think it's a little different. But redistricting is very important. Voter ID, I'm not going to dwell on a lot. The main thing is when things are done intentionally, okay, to direct people to vote. A quick example, Texas is famous for it. Texas, in its brief, before the court, with all of its money spent, could not find one single case of voter ID where you needed because someone actually pretended they were somebody else. They couldn't show one case, but they admitted in their own brief that the 600,000 people be disenfranchised by this law. Okay? Just to give an example of how absurd it can be, because it wasn't just blacks and Latinos that some of those legislators were after, they're after students. Okay, so in Texas what they said, if you're a student and you have your student ID from the State Department of Education, that's no longer any good. You got your ID from the state of Texas Department, that's no longer any good. You got to get a new ID. Okay, so that's among the worst kinds. Legal and voters, we got some legal and voters here tonight, they do a great job. And they were almost kicked out of Florida because Florida put down some terrible voter registration restrictions. They had to quit because otherwise they could have been sued for a great amount of money and fight it in court, and a year or 2 later they won in court, and that terrible law was thrown out. Now, things have worsened a little bit since that, okay? One, because the courts gutted the Voting Rights Act. And what they did, this is something called pre-clearance. That historically, because of all the blatant discrimination, not all in the South, but Congress had passed a law, which is what they call basically pre-clearance, part of the Voting Rights Act, which said to some of these states, and some areas in the North as well, that had a history of discrimination in their voting practices, that if you're going to pass a new election law, you have to have pre-clearance from the Justice Department first. Well, the court, in their wisdom, just a couple of years ago, said, well, racism is done, there's no more things like this, so we don't need it. And within days, dozens of states had brand new voter suppression stuff on the laws. Okay? They did actually, it seems like they were tipped on the decision because they had all these laws ready to go for other kinds of voter registration, voter suppression schemes. Now I know there's a great deal of misinformation today coming from the White House, all this talk about massive fraud, talk about busloads going to New Hampshire, etc. The problem with all that is it's good theater. And whether you're Republican or Democrat, I don't think you buy it because nearly every Republican Secretary of State and nearly every Republican county clerk says that's just not true. The problem is that detracts us all from the real problem every day that's not in the press, and that is this voter suppression. University of Chicago just did a study pointing out the impact, that it does have an impact, voter suppression, on black and Latino voters. And so I just want you to understanding about voter suppression is these are not dumb people. These are smart people. This is surgical. This is intentional. And I've watched what's been going on in various White Houses for 20-some years, and it's a little scary what's going on. Okay, now let's go to the good news. Despite all that, the good news is the federal courts, at least in many cases up to now, have struck down many of these outrageous laws. Texas, Wisconsin, Virginia, North Carolina, a number of places, okay? Secondly, the Justice Department and President Obama did a whale of a job, I think, trying to really identify which voter laws would be good, which ones might be a suppression. And a lot of great organizations, and maybe some here tonight, ACLU, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, NAACP, the Brennan Center, lots of groups have been fighting on these issues, okay? Now it's true, because the new president is giving another challenge. He supported many voter suppression laws. The new Attorney General, no offense, but he's a blatant racist, and in his career, sorry, no offense, but he has a very racist background, and he also worked very hard on suppressing the vote in Alabama during his career. And we may well have a new 5-4 court in the near future. So, if you want to do something, help these groups, okay? Help these groups. We need a fair fight, okay? We need a fair fight if we're going to have elections at work. Now let's focus for a couple minutes on some good stuff going on, particularly in Illinois. We've been pretty lucky over the years. We've had some great legislators, some of them from this area that you all know, been helping us. But here's some of the things that we introduced successfully and passed. And I'll get to some of the current problems. Motor voter, which is something proposed way long time ago by President Clinton, Bill Clinton, that is. Motor voter allowed us to use things like something funny about that, I guess. To use driver's facilities, other agencies to make it really easy to register people. And of course that totally worked. It's wonderful. It's a safe, secure way to do it. And the vast majority of people, that's how they register now. Now that was a big battle in Illinois. It's before some of your time, but at that time we had to sue Governor Edgar because he said we're not going to obey the law. And then the federal court said you have to obey the law. And he said, well, we don't have to. He said, yes, you do. And then they came up with a two-tier idea that, okay, well, if you vote in federal elections, we'll obey the law, but if you vote in local elections, we'll make you register twice. Took him to court again. The courts ruled on our side, but it wasn't easy because it was a threat to some people. Anyway, I'm getting with the good news. Early voting, we introduced that several years ago. I think it's been a great success. Voting by mail, now everybody can vote by mail if they want. I also believe it's been a big success. The Teen Judge Program, that is where we allow high school kids to serve as judges. It's great in so many ways. They get active and they vote, and often they stay that way the rest of their careers. Using technology, registration online. It's sweeping the country. It's going to be great. You just whip out your phone, because a lot of people move and just register online. And come at the next election, if you're thinking of voting by mail, register to get your application. Don't take the paper and then fill it out and send it to us, and we send you back a ballot and all that stuff. Boom, do it online in seconds. Okay, so there's a lot of good things that are going out. So again, I don't think the legislators here tonight, but shout out to all of our friends. Again, to Mike Kreloff, who represents our office in Springfield, and no person has done a bigger job in bringing election reform to Illinois than Mr. Kreloff. And all of these things are working well. Now, a couple key battles that I want you to be aware of. We're kind of complete. We have kind of a long list of things we'd like to see happen. One of those is automatic voter registration. Yeah. Now, automatic voter registration is based on a very simple notion. One of them is, number people are mobile. You can't read this too well, I don't think. Maybe you can, I can't. But people are very mobile. 700,000 people just in the county of Cook move every year. Over a million statewide. We're a mobile society, okay? That's number one. Secondly, we have the technology. Third, almost everybody interacts with government nowadays. Almost everybody in some way. So the point is, we have the ability now to have your registration stick with you. If Larry would move, today to Bloomington, there is no problem. We could automatically update his registration. Why is that important? Number one, lists are very important to prevent fraud. Number two, you save a ton of money. Think about it. If we have thousands of people, when we mail out to you for the April 4th election, 1.5 million mailings, I'm going to tell you where your polling place is, where the nearest early voting spot is, look at the website if you want to see our voters guide, all that kind of stuff. If we're mailing to 50 or 100,000 people in Cook County, that doesn't help anybody, does it? So we can do better. Now the governor, we had a lot of Republican support. It did pass. The governor vetoed it. Of course, we totally disagreed. He basically wanted it to go into effect after 2018. Can't figure out why, but we're negotiating. We're working with Republicans and Democrats in Springfield to see if we can bring that back and make some improvements. And I've got good hopes on that right now. So hopefully it'll happen. A synonym for electronic registration information center. Okay. Some of the stuff is not real sexy, so it'll be almost done with it. It means states got together and said, you know what? We need to share data. Okay, we need to make our list clean, and with modern technology we can do it. So the states got together, they called themselves that, And here's some of the examples. So we got Illinois to join. Thank you, Larry. So for example, the ERIC data, so we don't have it all yet, but the ERIC data says we got 34,000 people in Cook County that died. They're still on their rolls, okay? Now, as county clerk, I do get the information about who passes away in Cook County. But some people have the nerve to die in other states and do not tell us. And so that's where this 34,000 comes from. And as more states join, ERIC, that number will grow. So 40,000 people that we can just like that take off our list. Another 90,000 are registered twice in Illinois. We're not saying they're voting twice, but they're registered twice. You know, again, they leave here and they go someplace, and because we don't know it, they're still on our rolls, etc. That can all be wiped out. 60,000 move. Those numbers are very important. Again, to fight fraud and to save money, like I said, we do not want to mail to all these people that have moved or died or whatever, okay? And that is the future, and both Republicans and Democrats around the country, by and large, are moving ahead to do this. So ERIC is a great way to do it. Election day registration. I consider that a big victory. I think it's very important that while we do all these things, improve registration, find easier ways to do things, there are still some people that lost or have been caught. And those people now, with election day registration, they can still vote. Nothing's worse than someone coming to the polls and being sent home. And in the last election, more than 100,000 people in the state of Illinois got to vote through election day registration. So we've proven the need, we've proven that it works for us, at least in suburban Cook. It was seamless, but there is a group right now that is suing us and the state on that. I do think we will prevail with the middle of a lawsuit on they don't like some parts about the election day registration. So that's a challenge. Everything I'm talking about tonight, I'm looking for, of course, volunteers and people to help. But I do think we'll win it. Now, let's finish up by talking about things related to protecting the ballot, making sure you feel comfortable about how you vote and how it's counted. The way we look at all this is generally three ways. We look for everything that happens in terms of access to the ballot, registration. We've talked a lot about that. Okay. Then we talk about what happens election day. Okay, I'm sure we got election judges in the room. Really important to make sure there's not intimidation. We could do more. People always want to know more about who these candidates are. I certainly promoted voters' guides in Illinois. We do something on our own website. It's something we do. You might look at it. Candidates that agree to put little bios about themselves, because nothing is more frustrating is not knowing who these people are, because people want to do the right thing. And you're embarrassed, you vote for somebody, you find out later it's a real dog. Okay? So it is important to find ways to know as much as possible about the candidates. And then finally, the third part is the count and what we do to make sure that count's okay. And let me just quickly tell you a couple things. Number one, paper trail. Okay, now what that means is, remember, in Cook County, suburban Cook particularly, you have a choice when you go to the polls, at least on election day. You can vote on a paper ballot and put it in a scanner, or you can vote on the touchscreen. The touchscreens are by far the most popular. If we had more of them, we'd probably have 85% voting on the touchscreens. People just like them. But the key for us is that we can create a paper trail of all of our ballots. The paper ballots are pretty simple. Unless someone burns them, they're there, okay? For all of our electronic ballots on the, quote, touchscreen, the paper trail that's on that thing next to the, where you vote, the paper trail is the official record. So we have all that. So that puts us in better shape than some. Second, we do forensic testing, which is really above my pay grade, but it's something that we do with some great vendors, and there's only a few places in the entire country that do this. And the bottom line in forensic testing is you get people to kind of take pictures, more or less, pictures of the software when you're preparing the ballot before the election, on election day and after election day. And the theory behind it, of course, is that by taking all these pictures and looking at it, you'll be able to detect if someone attempted to or successfully introduce some malicious software. And that's the theory of it. We do it, we believe it helps. Fortunately, all of our testing has found nothing. Audits, audits are important. Check the paper trails where we count thousands and thousands of ballots. And what's important about all these processes, and particularly the audits, okay, is that all of them are open to the public, particularly open to the candidates and open to parties, and we have judges from both political parties always watching what goes on. Finally, just touch on election equipment. Larry mentioned it. There will be new election equipment coming. It'll take a while. We had this dog and pony show. I think it was pretty interesting. I think we're going to do another one of those just for those who missed out. And then there'll be a process, an RFP process, where those companies around the country will compete for our business. So anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I think that's going to help us, because, as Larry said, technology is advancing, and in so many ways, when technology advances, there's ways that you can do audits more successfully. This idea of calibration, you can improve that a great deal. So there'll be a lot of good stuff coming out of it. So let me conclude, because I don't want to take too long here so we get to questions, that there's a great deal to worry about, obviously. Many, many things we should be concerned about preserving our democracy. I don't want us to be too depressed or too paranoid. I like this example, for those of us as ancient as I am, that if you talk to people in 1953 or 54, oh my God, the country is going to hell, McCarthyism, people being arrested, people, blah, 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 all that things because of that. And yet, a few years later, a young guy named John F. Kennedy was elected president. So there is a pendulum that goes back and forth, and hopefully sometimes that corrects things. As Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But that arc doesn't bend on its own. And again, coming to places like this, we got a lot of very talented people in the room, a lot of people that are active, take citizenship seriously. I imagine we got some election judges here. So the key to me as we move ahead is people of conscience. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whether you're a politician, whether you're an activist, whether you're a church member. If people of conscience step up on these major issues of the day about making our democracy work fair, because I do believe most of us would agree. We may want our particular candidate to win, but above all, we want the system to work. Okay? If my Republican opponent gets more votes fairly, they should be in office. Okay? If we don't preserve that right, and we let money and tricks and games interfere, not only will we not electing good people, but the policy those people implement will not serve our interests. So I'm pretty confident, really, if people of conscience stand up, we will make a difference. Thank you, Larry, for sponsoring this.
David has mentioned our friend Mike Kreloff, who's back there waving at his mic. I asked Mike to send me.
I don't know if you can hear me. I want to point out, too, in case we don't have time and you've got particular questions. In the back of the room, Ryan Chu. Ryan Chu is our Deputy Director of Elections. If you want to know anything about any of this stuff, Eric, or whatever, he's the guy to talk to, got any problems. Where's Gail? Okay, Gail is the one that does all that early voting. Well, she's talented. We got a lot of early voting sites. Any questions about early voting? Any problems, whatever, go see Gail, okay? Now, we're not talking about taxes tonight. We're not, but I mean, we do a lot about taxes and TIFs and all that. And where's Tanya? Okay, in the back of the room, in the red, if you got any problems, taxes, I better amend that. But anyway, if you have issues related to our office, Tanya's in the back.
So one of the things I just wanted to say, I asked Mike Kreloff to give me a list of the bills that are pending in Springfield, and we're in the early part of this session. It was just 2 weeks ago was the deadline for introduction of bills, and there are over 35 bills pending, and a number of the bills deal with voter suppression. It's interesting, some of them try to create a voter suppression issue for the counties around us and exclude Cook because they figure they can't pass these kind of laws if Cook was included. There are a number of bills that deal with things like open primaries, which I think are interesting issues. California does open primaries. There's a bill that creates a Cook County election authority. One of the things, the reason there is a Chicago Board of Elections is that in Illinois, historically, many of the larger communities had municipal election authorities that were separate from the county clerks. In every city but Chicago, those were blended in a number of years ago. And I, again, as somebody who has to appropriate over $40 million in the presidential and gubernatorial years and $22 million in the non-presidential and non-gubernatorial years, I think we could be more efficient if we did combine these things. And these are bills we need to be looking at. And tomorrow, 3 of the county clerks from around Illinois are going to testify in the Illinois House, just in general, to talk about the last election cycle and the things that they'd like to see, and hopefully things like automatic voter registration that will come up in the discussion. Now, let us take questions from you, and we'll go for a while. Who wants to start? Lori, we'll give you the first one because you're at more meetings than most people here.
So I'm with Who's County, Chicago, and also we work with Illinois Valley.
And you get one question. Everybody gets one question.
Oh, darn. But anyways, darn. I just had a couple. And that is, I wanted to know, we in Chicago, we do want to get rid of our Chicago Board of Elections. We are just doing room for unlawful audits in the primaries, in the Democratic primaries, and the general. And I want to know, what are the chances of rolling that into David Orr's office, which is thought to be much cleaner than the Chicago Board of Elections? Please give me your ideas.
So I'll let David comment on this, but let me first say to you, one of the constant themes going on right now in government is consolidation of governments in this state. Everybody points out that Illinois has more authorities and boards and governments, from mosquito abatements through sanitary districts and things like that. I think that this is an idea whose time has come. Senator Don Harmon has a bill that wouldn't exactly roll it into David's office, but I think it's the start of the discussion by creating a Cook County election authority that the clerk of Cook County would be chairman of, as I understand the bill. But I think there is a chance for this to happen because there is savings. As I point out, David has a lot of elections coming up in April, and I think 7 of the jurisdictions in Cook County have primaries next Tuesday. Chicago has one primary, which is the filling of an aldermanic vacancy when Alderman Will Burns resigned. And so that whole government entity is just sitting there on their hands, basically, in these off years, while this part of the process is constantly working. David, your thoughts on it?
This idea is not new. It's been around quite a while. We've been talking about it since the early 90s. I support any consolidation I think saves money and helps voters, and I think this is one. If I had to be as frank as I could be, is the political will does not be there. It's not there. I met with the president of the county board and the mayor 6 years or so ago because every blue ribbon panel says we should do this. I suggest we'd be saving between 6 and 10, maybe more million every year. If we do it for 10 years, you're talking about some real money. And it makes it easier. Then you know who you're talking to is responsible. People still in the city think I win their elections, which I don't. But the political will is not there. Has not been there. I think it partly has to do with patronage. It partly has to do with local aldermen, like the fact that they can tell the city what they want and get what they want. No offense to, again, my friend Dick Mell, but you know, when I found out that one of his people was a top person who was a voting irregularity supervisor, things like that make me do worry about things. So let's put it like this. It's been talked about and nothing has been done. The only good that's come out of it, and I do think there's some possibility that may happen in the future, the good that's come out of it is that the people who run the budgets, they keep saying, we got to find ways to save money. So basically, they look at our budget and wonder why we have so much more to do and spend so much less money. And I think that has led to some reductions on the part of the city. I don't mean to blame the city. I'm just saying, if you get away with it, you do it. So I'm still doubtful But it's possible, since I'm a little older and may not be around too long, maybe if I was out of the way, they're more likely put it on the clerk. But keep in mind, for it to work, it depends on the clerk. You get a hack and you're not going to save any money anyway. But we should keep pushing. It may well happen. So I got my fingers crossed.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Subject gerrymandering. It's been around a long time. The goal of it is usually to produce a homogeneous electorate. It's become much more dangerous, though, because of the use of computers. Is anybody talking about actually using gerrymandering to create, using that same technology to create heterogeneous political units? In other words, to see to it, the evil from the homogeneous thing is that the representative just speaks to people who agree with him. But if you can see to it that everybody has a district that has a mixture of different interests.
I think that the Iowa system, and since one of our co-sponsors here is the League of Women Voters, they very much have been behind the referendums to amend the Illinois Constitution to come up with some kind of a fair map program. It's been a very difficult situation because when this Constitution was passed, the way to amend it was really limited. There's only one way to file petitions for a people's referendum to amend our Constitution, and that's for the legislative article, and that's where people have thought that they were going, but we've now had 3 election cycles in a row where Illinois courts have said, can't do it that way. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I was a proponent of a constitutional convention 4 years ago. Every 20 years, the Constitution says you should have a constitutional convention on the as a ballot initiative to see if it's a yes or no. But I think that if you were to do that and you were to go to use the computers, you would get what you're after, and that's what they're trying to do in Iowa. I think this will continue to be a struggle, and I think the coalitions will grow larger and larger.
I know some states have just taken this power out of the hands of legislatures to redistribute.
We've got to do it constitutionally, and
the
Constitution is hard to amend, and it was done for that way for a reason. It's the same reason we don't have a progressive income tax. It's the same reason we don't have the state responsible for the majority of funding of our public school system. It's the same reason we don't have merit selection of judges. This Constitution is not the greatest Constitution in the world, though it does have a great Bill of Rights, which is what everyone says, well, you don't want to touch it because of the Bill of Rights. But frankly, if all these other functions aren't working, the Constitution isn't working.
But reverse gerrymandering, if I could coin a term, would go a long way towards eliminating the extreme partisanship, the extreme...
Well, exactly, and that's what the fair map does for those that are experts on the Iowa system. Thank you. David, do you want to say anything on that?
Oh, you did a good job.
Okay. Well, there's got to be other questions here. Rodney Green is the city clerk of Evanston.
One of my questions is that when there's objections against petitions, don't you think it would be better for non-political people being on the electoral board instead of having the mayor, the senior alderman, and the clerk? I feel very, very at odds being on the electoral board trying to decide who's going to be on the ballot.
What Rodney's talking about is that in every municipality, for the municipal elections, the electoral board that will hear challenges to petitions is a local electoral board. David sits on a county electoral board that hears challenges for county-wide elections. But every municipality, and this is crazy, this is a system that is unfair. He used Cicero in his discussions. I think we need to professionalize these electoral boards so that the challenges are uniformly dealt with.